Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So sort of really to start, just a real basic overview of what is the exact problem you're hoping your book addresses?
I am hoping that the book focuses on this question of why, after 60 plus years after the Civil Rights Act, and why, in the midst of a booming multi-billion-dollar diversity industry, we still see so much racial inequality present in our workplaces. Black workers are still very much underrepresented in leadership roles in most industries and companies. They experience racial wage gaps. They experience kind of a stalling out at middle management levels. They experience substantial hiring discrimination. And the book tries to understand how both of those things can be true at the same time, why we've seen such progress on the policy front, but we haven't actually seen that progress translate into measurable results.
Great. And maybe just to take a little step back from that too. Why is this a problem? Like, why does this matter in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it matters a lot when we consider what our workforce looks like and where our workforce is going. We know that the United States is becoming increasingly more racially diverse, and particularly among younger generations of workers. Not only is it more diverse, but more workers are more likely to say that they want some attention to diversity in the companies where they are employed. So we've got a real mismatch between what our population looks like, what workers want, and how our companies are actually structured. So it's really critical to try to understand why we have that mismatch happening and how we can see more of a sense of unity and much more common ground between our policies and our reality.
Great. Thanks. That's helpful. And then so getting a little deeper into the book, can you explain some of your key research findings?
Right. The main argument that I make in the book is that the answer to the paradox that I posed above is that it's a function of what I call the gray areas in our workplaces that explain why we see this paradigm persisting. And when I talk about the gray areas, I'm talking about the parts of the job that are not necessarily formally embedded in your work, but still matter significantly in getting your job done. These are the social parts of work, the cultural parts of work, the relational parts of work. They are not necessarily regulated. They are often somewhat ambiguous. But because of that unregulation and ambiguity, this is where we see racial inequality thriving. So the social, cultural, and relational parts of work might relate to the need for having close relationships with colleagues outside of an organization who can write letters of recommendation. It can refer to having to understand an organizational culture to make sure that you are conforming to expectations. It can involve making sure that you have access to mentorship structures and sponsors who can make sure that they are facilitating your climb up the corporate ladder. And again, these are often parts of the workplace that are critical to how we do our jobs, but they aren't always necessarily explicitly specified. And because of that, we see that many workers kind of fall back on things that have been comfortable for them in ways that can perhaps inadvertently replicate racial inequalities at work.
Yeah, and with those findings, sort of looking forward to the solutions. In particular, at WorkRise, we work through multi-stakeholders. So there's all these different people across the labor market and across society who can fix these problems or take actions that would make these problems different. And so which stakeholders do you think are best positioned to advance your research? Is it policymakers, certain employers, advocates, certain sectors, or worker themselves? And what do you hope they'll do or change?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think there's room for people all across the spectrum. There's certainly room for policymakers to think about ways that they can encourage companies to be more aligned with the solutions that are out there. Certainly, organizational leaders have a critical and necessary role to play in making sure that they are setting a tone for making sure that workers of color and Black workers specifically have opportunities to thrive, to incorporate, to succeed to the best of their capability in companies. But even everyday workers can be part of these solutions also. One of the things that I include in gray areas are some checklists at the end of each section that talk about what DEI professionals can do, what everyday workers can do, what organizational leaders, what HR leaders can do to try to address these gray areas and make them less of a driving force in maintaining these inequalities.
Great. That's super helpful. And also a good plug for people should actually read this book, because it sounds like the whole book itself will be like really explicit to make sure people can actually take those research findings and do something actionable with them. So thank you so much, Adia, for joining us today and for sharing your work with us. And for those of you who are interested in learning more, Adia's book is published by HarperCollins.